Well, hello everyone. This is John Byrne with Poets and Quants. We have a very special webinar for you today on how to ace the MBA application essays. And with us to go over all of the best advice in detail is Emma Bond, who was Senior Manager of LBS Admissions, of course, LBS being London Business School. And she is one of the top ranked coaches in admissions on Poets and Quants. In fact, she has achieved the near impossible, a perfect 10 out of 10 client satisfaction score in client reviews for 5 years running. Emma is, in fact, a member of Fortuna, and Fortuna is a dream team of former admission decision makers from the world's top business schools. Fortuna has helped thousands of poets and quants readers gain a spot at their dream MBA program. And Emma has played a key role in all of that. Welcome, Emma Bond.
Hi, John. It's so nice to be here. Thanks for having me today.
So, why are the MBA application essays such a critical part of the admissions process?
So that's such a great question, isn't it? And especially at this time in the year when we're starting to see candidates get excited again about applying to the MBA and the schools were getting ready to drop all their essays. Um, the essays are integral to the application process. So most schools will get similarity in terms of test scores, in terms of CV, in terms of the job specifications that they ask for, in terms of goal statements that perhaps they're asking candidates for. But the essays are a chance for schools to ask the questions that really matter to them. So it's where an understanding and insight into the type of qualities that the schools you're applying to sort of really comes to the fore. So if you look at sort of different essays across the schools, it's a chance for you to show them who you are as a person. So not just as a professional, not just as an academic, although obviously, those things are important and schools will look at your track record professionally, they'll look at your grades and they'll look at your test scores. But it's a chance to bring yourself to life and to share your own authentic stories. So to differentiate yourself from all the other people that are applying. So if you look at some of the essays out there, so if you look at obviously the very famous Stanford one, what matters most to you and why? Stern, how are you going to drive change? LBS, what makes you unique? That's the new one that they introduced last year. And then a school like Wharton, so their second essay, what's your contribution going to be to the campus community? So answering these essays well is absolutely paramount. That's your chance to sort of show that you understand and can demonstrate the qualities and the level of engagement that the schools are seeking and show them the person behind the resume.
Now, what makes a great MBA essay stand out? Because obviously, all the schools that you mentioned have incredible applicant pools.
Mm.
Far more are qualified to attend and do well than actually get in. So, how do you really get an edge on your essay?
Yeah, so I think all of us who work at Fortuna have read hundreds, thousands of these essays over the years. And I think there are some common threads that stand out amongst really good essays. So number one is probably thoughtful content and content that will showcase creativity and authenticity. So schools want to know your fit for their program. They want to know who you are. And there are some essays that enable you to do that quite easily and enable you to be more creative than others. So Duke's 25 Random Things, which is one of my favorite essays. I love working on that with clients. But
Mm.
others are a bit more sort of what we call cookie cutter. So they might be the essays which ask you about your goals and then how will a particular school help you achieve that. But whatever the topic that the school asks, great essays are the ones that are where you've been particularly thoughtful, you've demonstrated your authentic self, and they tell a great individual story because that's what schools are looking for, is a kind of narrative that shows them who you are as a person.
Right.
Relevance, I think. So,
Mhm.
making sure that when you answer an essay, you actually answer the prompt. So there's nothing more frustrating as an admissions reader than a candidate who looks great sort of across every other aspect, and then they write an essay which might start well, but then they go off on a tangent about something that's not really relevant. Um, Essays with concrete examples. So these can really make your essays more compelling. They're a great way to support the claims that you're making and to make your essays more memorable to the admissions committee. So if you want to sell things like your leadership, for example, or your problem-solving qualities, it's not enough just to kind of say, I'm great at these things. What you need to do is perhaps share an example of where you've demonstrated that. It might be in your professional life, it might be sort of in your community or volunteering. And then another one that I always sort of talk about quite a lot with my clients is structure. So one of the things to remember is that an admissions reader might come to your particular file at the end of a long day of reading, and it can be, you know, a really long day. You can read a lot of these in a day if you're sort of sitting at your desk and you really need to get through. So the admissions reader might be tired and, dare I say it, even a little grumpy by the end of a long reading session. So you don't want to make it harder for them by jumping around all over the place. So in the same way that you might plan a verbal presentation and want to present a linear argument if you're speaking, you need to take the time to do that in essay. So you start with a bullet plan and follow it through. And then obviously polish. So we don't want to see essays that have mistakes. So you should have time left to sort of proofread. And we did a Poets and Quants session, I think it was last week or the week before, about really taking time to get your application together. And essays probably take more time than anything else.
True enough. Now,
Yeah.
many people have a number of stories to choose from. How do you
Mhm.
identify the most compelling story that's really going to move you ahead in the line?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And it's often something that we spend quite a lot of time with our clients discussing early on in the process before we sort of dive into getting to grips with particular essays. So it's really useful to take time to introspect and to reflect. So think about what experiences you've had that are particularly impactful. So times where you've made a difference or solved a particularly difficult problem, perhaps times when you've led people, you've led processes to achieve something that really stands out at work or again in your community. So, you know, one of the ways to do that is ask yourself tough questions at the beginning. So at Fortuna, we ask all our clients to complete a fairly in-depth and rigorous strategy questionnaire. It's quite lengthy, but it's super useful in the kind of information that it draws out. So we ask you about your strengths, we ask you about your weaknesses, we ask you about influences and defining moments in your life. And if you sort of think about and answer those questions with an open mind, so not really thinking about what you think the Adcom might sort of want to hear, but what actually matters and is important to you, you're almost 100% certain, I think, to come out with a compelling story. And then working with your coach. So sitting down, brainstorming, thinking about sort of what ideas might be on the table, and then picking out the best ones of those to make sure that, as we sort of I mentioned before, what you answer is relevant to the prompt, but also that something might seem insignificant to you. If you talk it through with your coach, you might sort of discover a completely new angle to it. So I believe everyone has a wow factor in there somewhere. So it's just a matter of actually finding it and pulling it out.
I recently had the opportunity to talk to a former Fortuna client
Mhm.
who was successful in getting into one of the top schools. And he had the unusual experience of being in the Capitol building on January 6th. And
Wow.
his inclination was to write an essay about that, but he
Mhm.
wrote it in very sterile and clinical terms. And one of the things that he got out of the consultation with Fortuna was to be much more vulnerable
Yep.
and have feeling and emotion in that essay that made it
Mhm.
really come alive. And I wonder how important vulnerability is in writing an essay.
Yeah, that's so true. I think sometimes when clients come to us, they don't really know what schools are looking for, right? So they have this question in front of them for the essay, but they sort of like, oh, well, I can't possibly talk about that because the school doesn't want to know that, you know, about my personal experiences. They want to know about what I did at work, or they want to know
Right.
about my super achievements. But actually, often schools can get that information off the resume, right? It's all there, it's all sort of in black and white. So being vulnerable and sharing those more personal experiences can be a really important way of differentiating yourself, so making yourself stand out. And it's sort of taking the time to do that, that really will make a difference often.
Okay, common mistakes. We know that candidates probably stumble over different parts of an application. What are the
Mhm.
most common mistakes they make, and how can they avoid them?
So in terms of essays, I think one of the big ones is not answering the prompt. As I
Yeah.
said before, it's so important to answer the question. So all schools have some different essays, some that seem quite similar, but it's really important to look at the sort of nuances of each one and make sure that you are checking. So I talk to my clients, and every paragraph that's completed, I say, go back and look at it. Have you answered the question? And then every sentence, does this answer the question? Is it adding value? Does this further your cause? And keep your answer relevant, particularly because you've only got limited word count to work with. So you want to cut out any fluff as well. That's what I call it, fluff. It's just my terminology for it. But if you think about, so Harvard's changes last year, right? The big long essay that they had, and they chopped it down to the 3 essays, and the word count came right down for each of those. And they actually wanted a lot of information in a very small word count. So I think it's 300 and then 200, 200 in the 3 essays. So when I speak with clients about this, I say, okay, start with what you need to have in there. And then if there's room, we'll have some nice to have. But what you've got in there to start with has to be relevant to the prompt. So make sure you've answered the question. I think the other big thing is being too generic. So that's another thing where if you are on an admissions committee and an essay comes across your desk and you look at it and you think, it's a great enough essay. It sort of answers the question. It's sort of, yeah, I know that this person worked at this company and I know why they want to do an MBA, but it lacks detail. And what it says to the reader is that you haven't done your homework on the particular school. So firstly, you need to know each school community, need to know the curriculum, and you need to know the culture. So how do you fit in that? What's the way that you relate to and showcase yourself as being somebody who would be a great sort of fit or part of that community? So sometimes it's tempting to repurpose bits of a particular essay for one school into another school. You can do that if you are judicious about it, but you do have to be super careful, because what you don't want is just pick up a chunk of text about, something and land it into another essay, because it's really evident when you read an essay that's not being sort of thought through like that. And schools want to know that you've done your research and that you're really passionate about their school, their program particularly, not just that you are sending out, an application to a bunch of top 10 schools. Um, and I think probably the final one is jargon. So it's important to remember who your audience is. If you are lucky, you'll get a reader who is very familiar with your industry and who knows the ins and outs and who knows the technical terms, but chances are you won't. Chances are you'll have somebody that will have a good broad business understanding. They might have worked in a different sector, but somebody that really knows the ins and outs and details of your specific role and your specific projects and X, Y, and Z. It can, if you put too much of that into an essay, it can make it very dry and very dull. And that's
Mm.
not what you want. You want to be vulnerable, you want to be interesting, and you want to be sort of personable and engaging. And a dry essay full of jargon doesn't really achieve that.
Now, I wonder to what extent an essay should reflect the values and the culture of a business school.
Mhm.
I can imagine that while that could be helpful, if you just shoehorn in a few phrases that you find on the website, that could be a
Mhm.
disaster.
Yeah, you're right. And one of the things that we sort of talk about is the laundry list, which is where somebody's gone on a
Mhm.
website and just gone, okay, I want to do this and join this club and take this elective and work, do lectures with this faculty member. And to be honest, anybody can do that. So you've got to research, 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 but you have to go a layer deeper than that. It's so easy nowadays to get information, but really to understand these schools, much easier. The advent of sort of things like this, Zoom, there is no excuse for not listening to webinars, joining coffee chats, all of that kind of thing. But realistically, the best way to learn about a school is to have conversations with the people that are there now or have completed the program. So talk to students, talk to alumni, ask them, what really stood out about their experience. So be thoughtful about your questions. Don't waste their time with things that you could get off the website, but ask them about perhaps what they felt was specific about their campus, about their school. Was it more competitive? Was it collaborative? Was it particularly inclusive? Is inclusivity a core driver? And you can also look at campus clubs. So they're often a really good representation of what matters to the student body, the faculty, and the wider school community. But realistically, yes, you might be able to visit, and that's great if you can do that, but it's not always practical for people, especially if you're an international applicant looking at a school abroad. But yes, connect with student ambassadors, connect with admissions, just ask the questions. But those specific personal experience stories that you get from students and alum are really, really important.
Great advice. So I'm imagining that many of the people who are going to be watching our webinar will be people who are at the very beginning of the process.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that happens to a lot of people when they sit down to actually write is they stare at a blank page, paralyzed, not knowing how to start. What's your
Mm-hmm.
advice to get them going?
So that's also a really good question. I think we've all been there, haven't we, writing, and you think, oh, I've got to churn something out, and I'm sitting there at the blank page, and it gets a bit scary. So I think taking the time. So if you are thinking about essays now, some schools are sort of will start to release them over the next month or so, but some schools haven't changed their topics much over the last few years. So you can at least sort of think about ideas. Um, it's that reflection. Go back with a fine-tooth comb over your experiences. So that's professional, but it's also personal. What are the stories that matter to you, that are meaningful, the experiences that you've had? Where in your journey, in your life journey, both work and at home, have you demonstrated leadership? Where have you inspired other people to do something different? Where have you created sort of measurable impact? Where do you see yourself adding value to a class or to a campus community? And just jot those ideas down. Doesn't have to be in any kind of, no one writes a great
Hmm.
business school essay in the first draft and the second draft, often in the third or fourth draft. They are an iterative process. But the thing to do is to break that blank page, is to throw ideas down, and take the time to introspect and to self-reflect. Because if you understand yourself, what you want from an MBA and how it fits with your sort of wider professional and personal goals, then you're off to a good start.
So Emma, how can candidates get in touch with you or a member of the Fortuna staff?
Yep. So what we would recommend is, and what we would love is if you can reach out to us for a free consultation. So we offer those to people who are at different stages of the business school journey. Sometimes people who are looking at business school next year or the year after, so 2+2 deferred candidates, but also people for this season. It's perfect timing, really, if you're looking at a September application or a round two in the new year. So you can ping us at info@fortunaadmissions.com, or you can sign up for a free consultation on the website. And we would love to hear from people. We really enjoy having those conversations and learning about, what you would like to achieve from your MBA journey.
Terrific. Emma, thank you so much.
No, it's great. Lovely being here. Thanks, John.